Hi, in this video, we'll build a simple Kafka message validation framework using Java and Maven. The goal is to create a reusable framework that consumes messages from Kafka topic and validates them as part of an automated test. At the end of this video, you'll understand how different components work together and how you can extend this framework for your own project. Before looking at the implementation, let's understand how these classes interact. At the very top, we have config package, which is going to have two classes. One is KafkaConfig and another is KafkaConsumerConfig. KafkaConfig is going to provide configuration values used throughout the framework. KafkaConsumerConfig is going to create and configure Kafka consumer using those settings. Next, we have consumer package, and in that we'll have a class called Kafka Message Consumer, which is going to be responsible for consuming messages from the configured topic. And we'll create a message validator class, which is going to contain the validation logic for the messages that has been consumed by the consumer. And finally, we'll have a Kafka message validation test under our test package, which will act as an entry point and orchestrate the entire flow. Now that we understand the overall structure, let's implement each class one by one. The flow starts with Kafka config, which provides the configuration value, and Kafka consumer config using those value to create the Kafka consumer, and Kafka message consumer reading the message from the Kafka and passing each message to the message validator. Finally, we have our Kafka message validation test acting as an entry point and executing the complete validation flow. Now that we understand the overall architecture, projects. So we'll start off with creating a Maven project, a simple one. The primary dependency in this project is to add Kafka clients library, and the version that I'm using is 3.5.0. While adding this dependency, Maven didn't automatically resolve few libraries in the environments. So I added a couple of libraries manually, such as 4J API, Snappy Java, 4G simple dependency. These are all for logging, Snappy Java and ZSTDJNI, and finally JUnit Jupyter. So JUnit Jupyter and Kafka client is our primary, and the other libraries that I have added are all interdependencies that my Kafka client library was looking for. So I have added them. So once the dependencies are in place, we can focus on implementing our framework. So this is the POM XML structure that we have. So although this example is intentionally simple, the same structure can be expanded in larger automation frameworks where Kafka message validation becomes part of continuous integration and automated testing. At this point, we have a complete flow from configuration, consumer creation to message consumption and validation. And finally, let's try to execute this test. So for the execution part, let's see the test and execute the complete flow in the action. So I'm going to run the Kafka message validation test and look for the test results. And I've also parallelly started the Kafka server. It has failed because the actual message is null and I'm expecting Kafka to be sending this message. So what's happening is I've just started the Kafka server and there's no producer sending any message at the moment. So what we will need to do is we'll have to have a producer app to be sending us this message. Let's start the producer app. Okay, so we have our producer app open. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this producer app and pass some values to the test. So I have passed a message at offset 1 and I'm going to rerun my test. So now that you see that the message has actually arrived to your consumer, and we've also validated the message that the actual message is hello Kafka, and this is my first testing message and it is passed. So whenever a message is received, it is passed to the message validator where the validation logic is executed. If the message satisfies the expected validation criteria, the test completes successfully. Otherwise, the test can be extended to report validation failure or trigger assertions depending on your testing requirement. This is a simple demonstration that completes the life cycle from configuration to message consumption, consumer creation, validation, and finally test execution. What I'm planning to do is, let's try to do the producer to produce couple of more messages. What I'm trying to do is, I'm trying to produce a couple of more messages, and let's see if it produces. So when it produces, so we have offset 2, and let's see if we can create 3 as well. So we've produced it, and then now I'm going to close this producer app, and let's try to rerun this Kafka message validation test. Yes, we have received the message that we were looking for, and it is passing the test. Although this is a simple implementation, it provides a solid foundation that can be extended for real-world automation projects. You can enhance it by adding support for external configuration, secure authentication, JSON schema validation, custom assertion, reporting, or integration with your existing test framework. If you found this video helpful, consider liking the video and subscribe to follow the Kafka Test Service series. In the next video, we'll continue building on this framework by adding more practical Kafka testing capabilities. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next